Howdy audio friends, welcome back to the channel. MrAyrit here. Got a unique amp to review today. This is the Schiit Nitsch Piety? So I've never heard of this Nitsch brand before, but what they seem to have done here is taken a Magni from Schiit and they've used some different components in it to give what they suggest is perhaps more of a tubey sound. So what we're going to do today, and what I did to test these, is I set it up against a couple of other amps, kind of in the price range, to see how tubey does it actually sound. So we've got the Vali 2 here with the Genelex Gold Lion tube is what I used, and I just did a comparison with this with the MT602. I like this one better. So we've got the Piety here as well, and then I've got the Topping DX1, which I did a review for not too long ago, and I think this thing for $100, because it's a DAC and amp, is a pretty darn good value. So where does the Piety land? Does it land, is it solid state like the DX1, or does it lean more like the Vali 2, or is it somewhere in between, or somewhere off the charts, right? That's what we're going to talk about today. So before we dig into it, I'm going to quote just some of the things that it says about this amp, which I don't think you can buy anymore. There was a very limited run of these things, okay? So you're going to be shopping on the used market if you're going to be buying one. But I've seen already just, a handful of them pop up. So I don't think they're going to be super hard to get a hold of, but, definitely not as easy as like a regular Magni or a Vali 2. So they talk about it having a circuit similar to the Jotunheim 2, like a continuity circuit. I'm not an electrical engineer. I honestly don't really know what that means, but then they also talk about using like other transistors and things like that, again, to tweak it for a more tube-like sound. Other than that, I think it's pretty much just a standard Magni. So this thing has 1.2 watts at 16 ohms, 1 watt at 32 ohms, and then at 600 ohms it does 200 milliwatts. So this seems to be more in line with the older Magni amps, because the new one, the Magni Plus here, I can see has 2.8 watts into 16 ohms and 2.4 watts into 32 ohms. But interestingly enough, the new one has 215 milliwatts of power at 600 ohms. So once you get higher up in the impedance, they get more and more similar. So outside of that, what do you need to know, right? It does look a little bit different. It's got, a little Nitsch badge on it there. It's got a little, I assume, that's a little like Piety sign right down there. We've got, other than that, it's got its own kind of unique gunmetal gray colorway. Other than that, it's typical Schiit form factor and everything like that. And, typical power on the back, RCA in, RCA out, high-low gain, toggle switches, and I think it just uses the normal Schiit power adapter, something that looks kind of like this, big wall wart with a little cable coming off of it. So as far as build and all that stuff goes, it's just the same as the Schiit, it seems like, as far as like interface and all that stuff, right? Did they achieve? The question really is does this achieve what they set out to do? Now, I really wish I had a regular Magni with me that I could test against, but since I don't, the DX1 and the Vali 2 are what I had available. And what I would say is I do like the Piety better than the amp in the DX1. It does lean a little bit more warm. It is a little bit wider. I feel like it's not quite as linear as the DX1, but when I'm sitting there and I'm comparing DX1, Nitsch Piety, Vali 2 with the Genelex Gold Lion tube, I would say that the Piety is much closer to the DX1 than it is to the Vali 2 with the Gold Lion in it. So does it really have like a tube sound to it? I guess I wouldn't really say that it goes that far. I was testing it against, some of my higher end tube amps and stuff too. And while I do feel like it leans more that direction than like a very sterile DX1, a topping product, which is typical solid state kind of sterility, I don't feel like it really touches the Vali 2 as far as that tube sound goes. And so what I mean by that is maybe it's a little less linear. It's a little bit smoother overall, the Vali 2 I found. Detail wise, I'd say all three are pretty comparable, but they just have slightly different presentations, with the Vali 2 being kind of like a wider, smoother, and the DX1 being a more linear, kind of more tighter presentation, with the Piety falling somewhere in between. So is it tubey? Maybe a little bit more than a typical solid state, but again, I don't have a regular Magni to compare it against, which would probably really tell the truth on that, right? So I guess the question would be is, who is the Piety for, and should you seek one out? I would say if you have a solid state stuff and you really like solid state, but you want it just a slight tinge of tubiness, then maybe try the Piety, right? If you've already got something like a DX1 or a regular Magni and you feel like you're pretty happy with it and you don't want like a wildly different sound, then I don't think the Piety is really going to be the way to go. I think going something like a Vali 2 or a full-on tube amp like an OTL or something like that, you're going to get much more tubiness and much more contrast from an existing solid state amp than you have than like the Piety is going to offer. So it's not a bad amp, definitely not. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with this, and thank you to the friend of the channel that sent this out. I really appreciate that, because I was very, very curious about it. Is it, supremely special or anything like that? I guess I don't really think so, but it is a good amp. I mean, I enjoyed it. I tested it with the new Beyerdynamic 700X and 900X, which I'll have a review of those coming before too terribly long. I tested it with the HE6 SEV2. I thought it sounded good. I used the HP3s, which I thought sounded good. But ultimately, I feel like it's probably generally worth its price at $150 or so that you could buy it for. Again, it's probably not the best deal in the world, but it's a unique limited run thing, so I can appreciate what they've done here, and I'd be curious to see what kind of tweaks they do on stuff in the future. But as far as, is it like a tube replacement, I don't think so. But I'm firmly kind of diving into tubes at this point too, so I'm a little tube picky and tube crazy maybe at this point in time, so it's no surprise that it doesn't really satisfy me in that regard. But even you, like I said, if you have a regular solid state amp, I don't know that this is going to be enough contrast to warrant buying it. I would probably go for something like a Vali 2 or the MT602 instead, if you really wanted to lean a little more into tubes. Although know that is not by any means, that those two amps are not by any means all that tubes can be. I've got my Eddy Current ZDT Junior, which is definitely a level above these things, and then the Quicksilver, which is even above that, but that's like $1,000, so it should be. Anywho, I hope you enjoyed this little review. Definitely, if you've got experience with the Piety, drop that down below. I always appreciate when people add their experiences to the comments. And once again, thanks for sending this out. You know who you are. And thanks to you for watching. I appreciate you. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this useful. And hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.